So this is my friend Shannon Sedgwick Davis. Isn't she an amazing leader for our world today? She's the CEO of Bridgeway Foundation. For years I have known you and have been inspired by you. To be truthful, this is a little story I want to share before I start asking you actual questions.
Oh no, what's coming?
And I was thinking about this when I was reading your book. I think you were one of the first people that really gave me a context and definition of the idea of justice. And years ago, you were part of the first people at International Justice Mission. That was part of your story. I've seen you get involved in all kinds of work in Africa, creating this group of really influential people called the Elders, which I don't know if you talk that much about. It's kind of a secret thing that she does. And it's just amazing work over years. And you have introduced me to people that have shaped how I see the world. And so I want to take a second and just, as I introduce you to friends out here, knowing that you've had a significant role in my life. So thank you.
Thank you, and I'm so excited to be here with you guys. And Jeff has been so instrumental in my life too, and I've been watching him and his family and sort of on social media, right? That's how it happens as we all get so busy. But you guys had such a deep and profound impact, and I love watching how you live your lives. I learned so much from you, so thank you for having me here today.
Okay, so when you watch that video, you're back here, you're kind of tearing up. What are the emotions that come over you as you kind of can even see a documentation of what happened?
Yeah, so I mean, you would have thought by the time I finished this sort of painful process of writing the book that it would have become at least a little familiar, and it still isn't. I still just sort of, right there, right? So I still want to pinch myself and go, gosh, did we really do that? Sort of disbelief in some ways. But then all of my friends who are on the video, especially David, whose story is woven through my book. David is who you saw at the end of the video there, who's just this extraordinary partner that has taught me so much and taught my children so much about how to live a true and a pure life and a life of just radical forgiveness. So it was such an extraordinary honor to get to be a small part of that mission. And when I watch that, I'm just constantly in awe of that honor.
So there was a moment, the video talked about it, about the Christmas Massacre. And I'm sure, I would love for you to take us back to that moment and what went through your head and that you were processing through that experience.
Yeah, that was really rough, right? So we have a money management mutual funds company, and we give half of our profits away. And we have this audacious mission statement, a world without genocide and mass atrocity. And we sort of realized by funding into a bunch of these various mass atrocities that are happening on our globe at any given time, that we weren't really doing what our mission statement said. We were either funding some advocacy to try to stop a brewing conflict, or we were coming in on the back end and putting Band-Aids on bullet holes, right? So we would rebuild a school after the rebels had burned it down, or would bring in relief, or again, continued advocacy. And the Christmas Massacre is committed. So the LRA was one of the conflicts that we were doing some funding into. I was introduced to it by Laren Poole, whose voice was narrating that video, and he's one of the founders of Invisible Children. And we were funding Invisible Children and funding some of their work and funding across multiple countries and conflicts. And when the Christmas Massacre occurred, the first Christmas Massacre, we really thought, gosh, again, we need to take a hard look at our mission statement and try to do something. So we did a few things here and there, and then 2009, Christmas came and it went. And we thought, gosh, maybe this sort of small amount of grant making that we did might have made a difference. And in March of 2010, I was up visiting one of the girls who works for Human Rights Watch, who we had been funding, a researcher on the LRA issue. And she and I sat down, again, this is March of 2010, and she looks across the table at me and she said, I was gonna wait until we met up to tell you, but I'm just back from northeastern Congo, and there was a 2009 Christmas Massacre, and 321 were killed, and hundreds of kids kidnapped. And it was staggering in the most horrific way that not only had there been a massacre, but that hundreds of people had been wiped from the face of the earth, and we were finding out about it 3 months later. And that was just a real turning point for us. I went to the board, of which I was a member. There were only 3 of us at the time. And I basically said, we have to either change our mission statement and actually make it more descriptive of how we're funding around this, or we need to actually try and do what our mission statement says. And if we do, I think the LRA could be a candidate for that. It's a non-state actor that's committing the crimes. It's an asymmetrical conflict. It was a conflict in which the African Union had authorized people to, the African Union troops and the Ugandan troops in particular, to go pursue those who were causing problems. So there was this almost sovereignty that you could piggyback onto if you wanted to, that wouldn't exist likely if it was a state actor. So it felt like if we were going to try it, I'd try to do what our mission statement said, that was the likely candidate to try it with, but had no idea that sort of when you start peeling back the onion and agreeing to do radio towers, then you're like, oh, but look, and now you're friends with the people who are being affected, and they're looking at you and saying, these are the things we need. Of course, we would never know what was needed. I mean, you have to just listen and learn and be trusted enough to be told things that could help. But then they're your friends.
And
so
what was the plan that they said? What was the need that they
communications and training. Communications and training. So the UPDF had been, they had 1,000 troops pursuing the LRA, but were having 0 success for the most part. And communications, so it was an area that was void of any cell phone coverage and very little radio coverage, and essentially what they wanted an ability to do was warn the next town. So they're like, if we're going to be massacred or if our kids are going to be kidnapped, we should at least be able to send a signal, right, to people who are 20 kilometers away and say, hide your kids or run because they're coming. And those, of course, were the mamas. Oh my gosh, you guys, I mean, the mothers that I got to know and learned from over there. You'll do anything to protect your children, and these powerful mothers who have these ideas and thoughts and just incredible creativity. And it was just literally nothing for us to just be able to fund an expansion of these little HF radio systems that were on bamboo poles, right? That they could throw up at night and throw down when they weren't transmitting. An incredible and extraordinary man named Abbe Benoit, who was one of the Catholic priests in the region, helped us expand that network.
So that was kind of the starting place, was the communication, which seemed pretty low risk probably, right?
Definitely in hindsight, low risk.
It was very low risk.
At the time it felt risky, but now, oh my goodness, very low risk, yes.
Yeah, and it was just a communication tool, let people know what was happening, yes. the implications of that kind of thing. And
like
then
an early warning system.
Warning system, yeah. And then you went further along with another plan.
Yeah, this is the onion analogy, right? Because then what happened was, obviously you got to know those people in the communities who were still asking for help on the training side. But information can be very dangerous too, right? Because if you know where the LRA is operating, if you know how they're operating, and if you can see their movements, right, and plot it, then you sort of almost have this predictive analysis that is available to you, that even the smallest amount of training for those troops, would have helped them really jump in front of it. And that was the tough decision. I mean, there was no playbook for that.
Right, and so you're a foundation, right? This is so complicated, right?
It's so complicated.
You're a foundation, and I'm thinking back to the book, but I think it was Laren and some other people on the team that were like, I got this crazy idea, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we talked about it. Laren and I were really close. Laren's one of the Invisible Children founders who's here with us tonight, and who I'm just deeply grateful for, who I never had been able to do this without. That's like one of the other things, right, is none of these types of things are possible without incredible partners.
Sure.
Like this idea, Laren had malaria 13, 14 times, had cerebral malaria at one point. I'm raising young kids, and he's going and living over there so that we can keep an eye on what we're doing. So deeply grateful to him. But yes, so Laren and I spent a lot of time together. He was working the advocacy routes, Invisible Children routes, and he called me when he got out of President Obama's office after the bill was signed into law authorizing some U.S. troops to go forward. And he said, Shannon, I think you're right. Like, I think advocacy is not going to be enough. Like, we got everything that we've been fighting for. Like, our advocacy. The most viral video of all time came from Invisible Children, right? Kony, 2012. And he's like, we've literally had the pinnacle of success within the advocacy movement, and we're still not there.
Yeah.
I mean, people are still dying. For context, when we joined, and started this mission, that previous year, 776 were killed by the LRA. Last year, 8 were killed by the LRA. Wow.
So you chose to start investing in the training of the soldiers.
Yes, and like I said, no playbook, right?
No
so I'm
playbook.
just kind of like, you can't open the yellow pages and look for private military contractors, even if you're from Texas. Like,
Yes.
It's not in your yellow pages. So yeah, that was, and I honestly think that, what was so great about having someone like Laren as a sort of co-mission partner in this was that the lawyer in me was like, let's go down this path because it's responsible and we care about these people, and if we say we're going to try to do what our mission statement says, we need to at least try. But in the back of my mind as a lawyer, I thought, we're definitely going to hit a roadblock. But then, like, somehow I felt like that would unburden my guilt, which is kind of gross, right? But I felt like maybe if we at least tried everything and then just were told no at some point, then at least we tried. And what was so great about having Laren as a partner is he knew we were never going to hit the roadblock, right? He told me back then, he's like, not only are we going to train these troops, but Shannon, you're going to get helicopters and we're going to close in on this. And I would just laugh. I was like, ha, ha, ha.
It sounds like a movie, right?
Oh,
Like,
exactly.
yeah,
No, you don't even know how much I laughed, And he was wearing this funny millennial white fedora when he would tell me those things. And I was just like, whatever. And of course, everything that he predicted happened.
Yeah.
He's just brilliant, and he saw, he had such foresight and just was able to see, a lot of people that I've been fortunate enough to meet can see invisible targets, right? Like, those are people who see the future and they can shoot at things. Laren sees the bullseye on the invisible target. in complete rarity. And so I kind of just got to ride his coattails on that a bit, and then pull back the reins constantly. Like, I gotta call the lawyer on that. I gotta call the lawyer on that. Let's make sure the State Department is good with this, because we probably should ask the U.S. State Department if we're going to help train a foreign army. Probably should at least check in.
Okay, now you're in the midst of this decision whether you're going to do this as a private organization supporting soldiers in another country. It's super complicated. And I have a feeling that you probably, as on a personal level, struggled with this idea of just war. Is that a fair statement?
It's totally fair.
So what was going through your head in the midst of that process to invest in challenging this army with the training that you were going to invest in?
Yeah, and it kind of comes back to what you mentioned about the elders. I had this this incredibly fortunate opportunity to be on the board of this group that was founded by Nelson Mandela before he passed away, called the Elders. And Archbishop Desmond Tutu was our chair, and I talk about how I talked with him about this and debated this with him. President Carter was one of our elders. Mary Robinson, the former president of Ireland. Just these incredible, heroic figures. But they had also, my time with them had really brought me to a place where I'd almost would probably have been a self-described pacifist. Again, from Texas, but I really might have been. And so this idea of engaging militarily and in an actual military operation where you have to consider that it could go wrong, right? You have to consider that training could be used for ill. You have to consider that Kony's MO was to stack circles and circles of kids around him, to go out the back way. And this idea that those who are pursuing him might hit some of those kids in the process as they go to sort of collapse on him and his leadership. And it kept me up at night. I didn't sleep through the night during that entire mission until we had officially withdrawn. But I also knew it was the right thing. And I also knew enough not to just completely trust my gut on that and to ask people who I respected and people who I also felt like were aligned in values with me. So almost like a mirror, right? So because they already know my heart, I'm grateful that they do, and so they could be a real gut check on my heart. And so I had a conversation with Archbishop Tutu that I talk about in the book, and I asked him at one of the elders' meetings to walk in the gardens with me. We were in South Africa for a meeting. And I started to tell him, and I did all the things I'm telling you, like, these are the 18 million things that can go wrong, and do you think I'm just crazy that I'm even thinking about this? And I couldn't even get all the words out before he grabbed my arm, and he said, "Sister," he said, you know what you are going to do. Like, right? So he's just affirming me. And he said, rarely things are black and white, but this is, And it was just, that felt like such. And only after the mission have I thought to myself, I think if I had told him that I was going to paint a 300-story building neon yellow, he would have been like, "Sister," because he loved me and he loved my heart, right? And he trusted my heart. And so I think it was this extraordinary act of friendship that I didn't recognize at the time as that. I recognized it as permission almost, which was good in that context.
That's good to remember as you're advising other people too. That's really good. So you decide to move forward. We got to see in the video kind of the results of everything that happened. When you think back to it today, as you're watching it, you're talking about what you're feeling in the midst of it, do you think it was successful?
Yes, I do. And it was successful because we chose to be present, physical presence. It wasn't successful because we poured millions of dollars into a mission. It wasn't successful because we cut the killed rate from 776 to 8. 8 is still too many. It was successful because we chose to be fully present and be able to engage with our brothers and sisters in that part of the world. And listen. I mean, we learned so much. It was not without incredible stumbling blocks and scary and hard times. I mean, when people ask me if I'd do it again, it's not 100-0. It's like 55-45. So we lost a ton out there. We lost a lot of ourselves out there. Like I said, Laren has malaria in the form that recurs. So even if he were to never travel back, he'll get it when he's run down at times here. At one point, one of the private military guys, essentially poisoned Laren as a joke, away from the boys when they were young for long periods of time. I mean, it cost us a lot too, but in the end, I definitely feel like it was worth it.
In the midst of this, I've heard from reading and listening to some interviews you've done, it seems like you've learned a lot about forgiveness. What can you share with us about what you've learned about that? Maybe even a story or something.
Yeah, so for me, that has a lot more to do with this idea of justice. And I was trained as an attorney here in the United States. And our entire justice system in the US is based on this idea of retributive justice, right? Like, you committed a crime, you pay for your crime. And this idea of that is where we're made whole, through this retribution and through others paying for it. And probably the greatest gift of my time out there, especially as an attorney whose heart beats so fast for justice, it always just has, it's just who I am, to learn that justice wasn't that retributive justice is false, it's a lie. And there is this other kind of justice, this restorative justice, that is true, and that really brings us all back to our common humanity. So, for example, we had to come up with really creative ways to collapse the LRA. We took a shot at Joseph Kony and tried to collapse sort of the head of the organization, right? And we thought the rest of the LRA would collapse as a result, and we failed. We missed him by a few days in a mission that we launched. And then we just realized we had to change strategy, and that the majority of his leadership were kids that had been kidnapped at 10, 12, 15, and were now 35, 37, fighting in his army and leading some of these smaller groups. And so there was this idea that came about through those who had been lucky enough to escape and those we were learning from who had been a part of his army, this idea of what if, Kony is the guy sort of hiding out in this remote area that's very difficult to reach and is putting everyone else at risk in these smaller groups. What if we were able to peel those groups away, right? Sort of cutting the snake off the head instead of the head off the snake. And Uganda was incredible. This is where we learned about restorative justice. They decided to offer amnesty to anyone who wasn't an international criminal court indictee, which is staggering, right? Some of these people committed mass scale murders. And this idea that, no, to get over this war and to move forward, we're going to extend amnesty. And so then as a result of their offer to do that, we were able to try and target these groups, and we got to learn through our radio network and through human intelligence. We would know that, Opio Sam is probably in approximately this GPS range, this area. We were pursuing this over 3 countries, and it was triple canopy jungle most of the time. And then this incredible man, David Ochidi, who's one of the ones who escaped from the LRA, he would go back to Uganda and try to find any remaining family members of these ones that we knew general areas for. And he would take his iPhone and he would record their voices, right? The voices of the mother asking their son to come home and telling them there was amnesty, or the voices of a sister. Come home, my son, I've never stopped waiting for you. These types of messages. And we bolted these massive speakers to either side of our helicopter, and we would just hover over general areas where we believed that some of them were hiding. And 730 walked out, and that's really what collapsed it. Restorative justice.
Now, in the midst of it, you were at times at home and at times in Uganda, right? My wife and I are wrestling through this idea of love and work right now and the tension between those two.
And writing a book,
Yes.
which is so hard.
So hard.
Because both of y'all are writing the book. At least I can ask Sam to be home when I was writing the
Right.
book. Oh my goodness, I can't imagine.
But what did you, I can imagine there was these moments where you knew what was happening there and you were putting your boys to bed. How did you wrestle with that tension in your life through this whole season?
It was really challenging, and it was made more challenging by the fact that my oldest was 3 when we started this mission, and my youngest was essentially born, towards the end of the first Christmas Massacre, and so they were babies. Just babies. So I'm a highly communicative person, and so the thought of not being able to tell them where I was going or just be able to communicate it in a way that they would understand was a deep challenge for me in the early years. I remember Connor, my oldest, at one point saying, "Oh, Mom, you're going back to Africa, I guess, to see the zebras," right? Because his idea of Africa, from whatever they gave him to color in school, was this idea of zebras. I was like, "Oh, honey, zebras would never take me away from you." And then we sort of gently would be able to say a little more. At one point, I did get to talk to him about there was this man, Joseph Kony, and he was hurting kids. And Mommy had some friends that she thought maybe she could help, and we were going to go try to do some work. And so we started calling Joseph Kony Darth Vader. He was young, and so he had to have this idea. So we laminated this big map, and I would show him where I was going to be, and he'd move like this Jedi sticker close to where I'd be. And then he'd always ask me where Kony was, and we knew approximately where he was. We really were keeping an eye on the situation, so he'd put the Darth Vader sticker there. And then he had a green Jedi sticker from Mr. Laren. And so he'd put, and Mr. Laren was always closer to Darth Vader than Mommy was, so we always felt good about that. And I remember after we did the Merlin operation, which was the one where we missed Kony by just a few days, we came home and they were like, "Oh, you didn't use the Force, Mommy, like, way to go," when we told them we didn't have Darth Vader. But there was like this sense of just trying to speak their language, but also be clear, because I want my boys to be whoever in all the world that they're created to be when they grow up. That is like my single goal. I will feel like I was successful as a mom if they're comfortable doing that. And I feel like the best way to model that for them is to try to do that myself, and try to be who I'm created to be. And so it is this idea of sort of inviting them into that, but also being cautious. We did spend a couple summers in Kigali, which was close to Uganda, and we had a little puddle jumper plane, so I could go to work, but I was at least on the same time zone as them. And now the great struggle with them being 13 and 10 is the book is out, and they had gotten to know David really well. David is the former child soldier who was kidnapped. And his story is woven through mine in the book, and his story is heartbreaking. When he was kidnapped, he was asked, "Who do you love the most, your mother or your father?" After they had rounded all the children up and all the people in the village, and he was like, "I can't answer that." And they're like, "Who do you love the most?" And he gave an answer, and they killed his father as a result. So he bears this massive burden thinking that it was essentially him who killed his father, which of course is false. He was just a child, and he's never seen his brothers since. And so when he goes and does these speaker messages for us, and when we see people coming in from the field, you know, he's right there to welcome them home and bring them back to their families. And I think he's always looking for his brother. But my boys know David as David, like the boy who'll like jump on the trampoline with them and kick a soccer ball with him. And so now that the book is out and my 13-year-old's read it, it's very challenging for him to read David's story and to really understand what David's endured. We've not let my 10-year-old read the book yet, but the boys are both going with us to David's wedding in December, which we're very excited about in Uganda.
I love it. Well, last question I have for you tonight. You're with a bunch of people that care very deeply about justice work, about changing problems that are in the world that they seem are broken. I think this story, at the end of the day, you see, because you know all these people involved in it, as hopeful, right? So what encouraging words would you like to say to the people that are in the midst of work today that just need a boost of encouragement today that you could speak into them?
Yeah, so grateful. I know that since you guys are here, you're already listening to whatever's making your heart beat fast, and I would just say, listen to it, refine it, trust people with what's making your heart beat fast, and don't stop. And by the way, don't pay attention to these arbitrary boundaries. I mean, I was an incredibly educated attorney, and I assumed there was red tape here. And by the way, we never got to the red tape. Not only was training a private military okay, but I mean, I never saw red tape. We didn't get a no, right? We didn't get that far. And I think in our lives, we get so used to what these paradigms are for the things that we're interested in, and we get so comfortable in it because we're being a sponge and we're learning so much. And it doesn't mean you have to go up to the red tape, because at times it may not make sense to you. But actually, don't let that red tape like distract you from what might be in front of you, right? Again, this idea of the invisible target. Steve Jobs didn't see red tape, right? We can name a bunch of people who haven't. And just be aware enough to be like, I have decided that this is a boundary for this field I'm interested in, or for this thing that I'm pursuing. And ask yourself if that's really true. And it's highly likely that it's not. So that would be my advice.
Let's thank Shannon Sedgwick Davis for what she does. Thank you so much.